Your conscience, my conscience, is an amazing gift from God. It's so powerful and so useful when it conforms to God's design. When it doesn't, it becomes, well, there are times when it becomes useless because it no longer has a voice. And there are other times when it actually becomes a tool for harm and damage in our lives. This has everything to do with how it is educated. I won't go on and on and on about it, although it's tempting because it's the subject of our conscience and how it is formed, deformed, educated, re-educated. I think it is an issue that doesn't get very much airtime and should. But all I wanted to do was get us into the passage we're looking at from 1 Timothy 4, where Paul writes to Timothy that people are going to abandon their faith and they will turn away from the faith, abandoning the faith, and they'll turn to the doctrines of demons. And then he goes in verse 2 to say, such teachings come through hypocritical liars whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron. I talked a little bit, well, actually more than a little bit. I talked about this yesterday. Here's the thing about a wound that has been seared with a hot iron. Once the inflammation of the searing dissipates and goes away, the pain of that wherever the issue was, you have no feeling there anymore. Which is why Paul, the Holy Spirit, through Paul, spoke of a seared conscience, a conscience seared as with a hot iron. The conscience no longer has a voice. There's no feeling of conscience anymore. Now, you got to be careful with the feelings thing, because if we put feelings behind the steering wheel of our life, we'll very often wind up in the ditch. But the one of the aspects of the conscience is that our conscience will poke at our feelings to get our attention so we can process and choose wisely. Okay, these people whose consciences have been seared as with a hot iron, in verse 3, they forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and who know the truth. Now, the forbidding to marry thing, boy, I have to be real careful here, because I don't want to throw rocks in the wrong direction. And by the way, I rarely have authority to throw rocks. So Paul was pointing to a specific practice in the culture of his day, that these people who were hypocritical liars, that they taught, they essentially were the mouthpiece for the doctrine, the teachings of demons. And one of the things that they taught, they didn't teach it. They forbid people to marry. Now, the forbidding thing, this is big, okay? to forbid, anybody who can forbid anything, that sets on their ability to forbid rests on the fact that they have been granted or they have authority over whomever they forbid whatever. Okay? You have to be very careful in your life to whom you grant that level of authority. Now, the scriptures forbid some things. It's clear. Long years ago, I don't remember even who it was. It's been that long ago. They said, well, God has made this plain. He didn't stutter. Yes, there are a lot of things that God has made very plain. And we go back to the 10 words, what we call the 10 commandments. These are 10 powerful commands, and they forbid certain things and require certain other things. So, start there. And you move your way through the entire Bible into the New Testament, and there are still some things that truly are forbidden. Now, the question becomes less, why are they forbidden, and more, who forbid them? In this particular case, the scriptures never forbid marriage. Even Paul, who was an advocate for singleness, and the scholarly assumption is that he was, in fact, a single man, unmarried. And part of his reasoning back in Romans chapter 7 and 2 or 3 other places where he talks about one of the difficulties with the married life is that you have to live in a way that you have to take care of your spouse and your family. I mean, this is an obligation. And to do that, sometimes you have to choose. Am I going to, how do I follow God's design? How do I put Him in first place? And how do I do that with a spouse and my family? It becomes, I'm not going to call it a problem because I love being married. I will say, though, it sometimes draws a line where we have to make some choices. And Paul's advice is, if you're not wired for marriage and you are wired for singleness, stay single. It makes you more available for God's purposes. But he never says you must not marry. He doesn't, and that isn't even as strong a language as he implies here, because the language implied here is you are forbidden to marry. Well, anybody who makes a statement of forbiddance, if that's a word, well, anybody who forbids anything, I have to, there's a part of me, my curiosity goes, why would you forbid that? Now, some things it's obvious on, but others, why? That's an okay question, but it shouldn't be the first question. The first question is who gave you that authority? Where does the authority come from for you to be able to forbid anybody doing anything? And in this case, their authority did not come from God. And Paul's making this clear. These people, not only have they abandoned the faith, but they are drawing others away from the faith. And their authority, it does not come from the Holy Spirit and the Father and the Son. It comes from who's at the head of that whole movement. I don't want to overstate it, but it deserves a statement. Satan is. So where does the authority come for forbidding people to marry? If it doesn't come from God, there's essentially only a couple of other places it can come from. One is a person's own ego, where the person says, I'm smarter, I'm better, I'm more powerful, I will forbid. Okay. There's another side that their authority comes from Satan himself. Wow. They forbid people to marry and order them to abstain from certain foods. Now, when I was a younger man, and again, I can't even remember who it was, but I heard someone kind of trying to do an exposition of this passage, and they said, there it is. That's the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. They forbid their priest to marry. And, well, this was back in the day. I'll tell you how long ago it was. And on Fridays, you cannot eat meat. Okay, now there's probably a number of things wrong about that, what I believe was a misinterpretation. And the first thing is, the Roman Catholic Church did not exist when Paul wrote this letter. Okay? No. And the second thing is, even the Roman Catholic Church today, in our era, it doesn't forbid everyone from marrying. Only the priesthood and nuns. And today, my understanding is they don't even require you to eat fish on Friday anymore. Although the tradition continues, and I used to live in Northeast Iowa, which is it's highly populated, heavily populated by Catholics, and Friday's fish day at every restaurant. Okay, but I don't think you can say this is Paul writing against the Roman Catholic Church, because it didn't exist yet. All right? Okay. So I'm not an anti-Catholic. I'll be frank and say there are things about Catholicism that bother me, and there are many things about the current Pope that are deeply troubling to me. And yet, this is my opinion, you can have your own, but I believe when I get to heaven, there are going to be Catholics there who truly did yield their lives to the living Christ and his authority. Well, okay, whatever. But here's the thing. Paul is pointing to hypocritical liars who are making decrees out of an illegitimate authority, and things like forbidding marriage, ordering certain kinds of foods cannot be eaten. Okay, so what he's saying is these people are enforcing things about living life. These are not theological. These are very runway level things. And I kind of like what he writes about the part about having been ordered to abstain from certain foods, which God created to be received with thanksgiving by those who believe and know the truth. Now, Peter, you remember this if you've studied the book of Acts. He was at the house of Simon the tanner. And about noon, he was up on the roof. Well, if you've ever been to that part of the world, you realize that about noon, it's getting pretty hot. And up on the roof, you could at least catch a whiff of a breeze. And he was in a coastal town, so that, there It is not Mediterranean coastal, but he was near a body of water, near enough that there could have been cool breezes, probably were, on the roof of the house. And oh gosh, I just looked at my time and realized I don't have time to tell the rest of this story. So I'm going to pick it back up with Peter at the house of Simon the Tanner next time when we get together for Soul Care with Stevie Boy.